My name is Wajma Mamandi, and on behalf of the CU Boulder School of Education, I would like to welcome you all this afternoon to the 17th Annual Teachers of Color and Ally Summit. So this year's virtual summit features two afternoon gatherings. Today, our BIPOC Teacher Panel that will center the experiences of local educators. And on Thursday, we'll have facilitated affinity group conversations to foster community building and knowledge sharing. On Thursday, attendees will be able to self-select into one or more of the following affinity groups. We'll have a group for early career BIPOC teachers, a group for Latinx teachers, Black educators, Indigenous educators, Asian and MENA educators, and white educators striving to be anti-racist. So please don't forget to register for Thursday as well. And now I'd like to pass the virtual mic to Kathy Schultz, our wonderful Dean at the School of Education.
Thank you, Wajma. As Wajma said, I'm Kathy Schultz, she, hers pronouns, Dean of the School of Education, and I'm so excited to welcome you to, as Wajma said, the 17th Annual Teachers of Color and Allies Summit, and our first virtual one. We're so delighted to have you here, and it looks like there's many of you here, which is great, for what promises to be a wonderful afternoon in an incredible panel of teachers. Since I came to CU Boulder almost 5 years ago, this has been one of my favorite events because teachers, and especially BIPOC teachers, are at the center of this event. And I'm so grateful to our advisory board, to the team of Krishma Petisipu, Sarah Mcdonald, Wajma Mamandi, and Becky Cabral, who have designed, along with the advisory board, who have designed an incredible virtual experience for us so that we don't have to miss having this event this year. And they've created a space for us to have the kind of vital conversations that we all need in the middle of this impossibly difficult situation for educators. The work that each one of you has done as an educator already is remarkable. And your work over the last year has been both heroic and invisible. And so please know that you and your incredible commitment to the students you teach is visible, highly visible to us, and something we want to celebrate. This conference began in 2004 when a graduate student, Carla Carino, had the idea of bringing teachers of color in our partner districts together to learn from one another and to explore new ideas. So she and her colleagues wanted to bring teachers of color together to create a space for them to discuss issues of diversity, such as race and racism in their districts. And her idea was in part in response to a commitment of our School of Education to more directly address issues of racism and white supremacy, a commitment that we still hold and we work really hard to embrace. And this idea, initiated by a graduate student, began with just a few workshops, and it's been nurtured by so many people over the years, including Sarah and more recently Krishna, and has grown into this large conference that draws in many, many different districts. I really do hope that our panel today of this inspiring group of teachers and your opportunities to be parts of the affinity groups that Wajma described on Thursday will be sustaining for you and carry you through this year, which we know will continue to be difficult. I hope that you can find joy and inspiration from the teachers who you will hear today and who you will meet in virtually on Thursday. And even in this kind of virtual format, I hope that you were able to make the kind of connections that Carla and her colleagues envisioned when they created the conference 17 years ago. These kind of connections are the kind of learning that you'll gain from the panel today, I hope will sustain you through difficult times, and we all need that. So please join me in, sort of virtually, I guess, thanking the teacher panelists, the affinity group facilitators, of which there are many, the TOCA board members, and as I mentioned, our leadership committee who have made this event possible. And a warm thanks to all of you for joining us today in the midst of your busy lives. I'll hand it back to Wajma.
Hi, I'm Sarah Mcdonald. I'm just going to give you a quick little information on how to handle the Q&A session towards the end. We're going to have the panel, and then in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll have a Q&A time for you to be able to ask any questions you might have of the panel, time permitting. So if you just hover over your screen, and at the bottom you'll see a Q&A with little chat boxes. If you just type your question into there, we will either answer it via text, or Gerardo will incorporate it into the event. So if you have any questions about how to do that, you can also hit the chat button and chat the panelists, and we'll get back to you there as well. But definitely hit the Q&A button whenever you're ready. Wajma?
Thank you, Kathy and Sarah. So now I have the privilege of introducing our participants. First up is our moderator, Gerardo Munoz. Gerardo is a 22nd year social studies teacher at the Denver Center for International Studies at Baker. Born and raised in Denver and identifying as Chicano, Gerardo is Colorado's 2021 State Teacher of the Year, and very, very notably, a recent recipient of the Denver Nuggets Most Valuable Teacher Award. Next is Nila Ali. Nila is a science teacher at South High School in Denver. Born and raised in Denver as well, Nila graduated from South High and CU Boulder. She's a founding member of Denver's Black Educators Caucus, a group of Black educators organizing to address systemic issues of anti-Black racism and white supremacy culture within their district and their union. And then we have Carla Carino. Carla, who way back when imagined TOCA for the first time, is a 22-year veteran of the classroom and a teacher leader. Most of her time has been spent in Denver public schools. As a social studies teacher, Carla believes history and identity are the pathway to liberation that gives students agency to fight for justice in their communities and personal lives. Next is Andres Martinez. Andres, who identifies as Chicano and Indigenous, is a proud union and community activist with deep North Denver roots. He has taught social studies at Thornton High and Adams 12 since 1997, and recently received his master's in educational equity and cultural diversity with an endorsement in cultural and linguistic diversity from CU Boulder. And finally, we have Marcus Cyrus. Marcus, a citizen of the Apsaluka Nation Crow tribe, serves as a Native American culture and equity specialist as part of Denver Public Schools' Native American culture and education team. Marcus and his team support over 1,000 Native American and Alaska Native students in the district. Thank you all for being here. And now, Gerardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wajma. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Sarah, for making this happen. We'll start in just a second, but my name is Gerardo Munoz. As Wajma said, I am the first Chicano State Teacher of the Year in Colorado, and Denver Nuggets Most Valuable Teacher for the month of December. I want to say really quickly, my first TOCA experience was probably the first one that was ever done. I'm kind of trying to do the math, and I know I was an early service teacher. I was in my 4th year when I heard about this Teachers of Color and Allies Summit. I don't know where my career would have been without it. Our keynote speaker that day was Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, and I just remember feeling vindicated. I didn't know how to do any of the things that she was teaching us to do, but they all sounded true, and they all sounded like things that I could aspire to. The other big thing that I discovered at the TOCA conference was teachers of color. That's a thing. I was floored. I couldn't believe it. And just being around other teachers of color, being in spaces where I could have conversations where I didn't have to define every single term and explain every single interaction that I had was one of the most healing experiences of my early service as a teacher. So it's amazing to see folks on this panel. Some I've just met, some I've known for a really long time. And just you are in for a real treat with the folks who are here to share their experiences with us. So we're going to start with some quick introductions. We'd like folks to kind of like move. Well, I guess we already kind of did an introduction, so thank you, Wajma, for that. We're going to go ahead and jump into the first question. And forgive me in advance. I'm not used to moderating the Q&A, so I'm going to do my best. Don't take it personally if I miss your question or inadvertently dismiss it. I know dismissing questions really hurts people's feelings, and it's not my intent to do that. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. First question we've got that I think is on the minds of so many of us in this space. The past year has been acutely difficult. Yes, let's get our cameras on, y'all. Unless you are uncomfortable. What's up, Andres? Been a long time. There's Carla. Carla knew me when I was an undergrad, and if the discussion goes long enough, she can expose me a little bit. Mr. Cyrus, good to meet you. We met really briefly. Nila, nice to see you. And we have Becky Cabral down here. And so the other thing that you may know is I host a podcast called Two Dope Teachers and a Mic. I produce it as well. And so Nila was just on the show. Check it out. It was good. All right, so past year has been acutely difficult. I don't know if y'all noticed, but we've had a pandemic, and it's been difficult for all teachers, we think. And we know that the struggles that have faced all teachers affect teachers of color in particular. So how have you coped? Everybody smiled at some point on here, so there's something there, right? And what keeps you engaged with this important work? We'll popcorn it. Step into your power, folks.
I think something that has kept me grounded and has been really important is community. I think because in Denver right now, there are teachers that have really rallied to hold each other in this space and have been doing the work for a long time. So we already had things in place. And I'd say there's been a lot of professional developments provided by other teachers of color that have really helped sustain my work-life balance. And so making sure that we are staying healthy, that we are working out, and radically, right? Like self-care isn't, I'm just like sitting in a bathtub, shout out to Fernita Ware. But it really is about, I need to get up and go to work out today before work so that I don't have situations at work, right? Cleaning tables and doing all these things that we have to manage in the COVID era.
Absolutely. I feel that on a really deep level. I just tried to run in that wind and it was rough, but I'm glad I did it. All right, who else?
Again, like I was introduced, my name is Marcus. I come from Bachawaja, which is a Crow agency in Montana. To answer that and to kind of feed off Anila's point is that extension of community also. I think you kind of get it, well, not even kind of, you literally get to see who else is picking up the shovels that you're working with. And there's a little bit of inspiration that comes off of that. So, not only within, DPS or within one school district, it can be a collaborative of districts. And then again, within our community. So, yeah.
Thank you, Marcus.
I'll go next, Andres here. So yeah, I was gonna say that I think what keeps me going, I think, is just recognizing, I guess, the struggles that, a lot of our families, our students are going through, I mean, yeah, as people of color, we're at a higher risk of dealing with these health effects of this freaking thing, right? But on the other hand, our economy does not support, having kids just hang out at home. So I don't know. I mean, I think that, I got into this profession, to be a part of a larger struggle. And that includes even during these kinds of times, you know what I mean? And so, and I told my kids that from the get-go, like, I'm here in solidarity. Yeah, I'm afraid. I don't want to be bringing, COVID home to my family, and stuff like that. But we can get through this together. That's been my motivation.
That's incredibly powerful. Community and solidarity, those are really powerful things. Carla, you're the last one, I think.
I agree with everything everyone has said. I think community, and that's beyond even COVID. I think for teachers of color, having community is essential to not burning out in this profession. And it has been really essential during this time period.
I have lots of emotions, I guess, and I don't even know that I've been able to sort them out yet. It's been quite a ride, but I feel so much for our students. I think, like Andres, when I entered this profession, I was down, like I was committed, and that is true for this time as well. And I think for our students, I just feel for them so much that this is just really, really hard. I read this article fairly recently that said teenagers they feel, well, I teach high school, they feel deeper than adults do. They feel more intensely than adults do. And that has really stayed with me and was probably, I also have my own children who are teenagers. So that has been a good lesson for me to kind of cling to as we've gone through this and to listen to the kids. I think we have not, and I don't even know if I'm answering the question, but we have not listened to them. And I think their voice is the one that has been missing in all of this. No one has asked them, hey, do you want to take a state test? Hey, do you think it's safe to go back to school? And so I think trying to listen to students and trying to just slow down from all the things we're supposed to do as teachers, like how many kids do I have failing? Take this test, take that, just slow down for a second and really listen to what they're saying. I think that has really kept me going, and community has really kept me going.
It's such an incredible point. I think that what I'm hearing from everybody is that sense of community. Nila, you spoke very clearly about concrete ways in which teachers in Denver, in particular Black educators in Denver, have really banded together to move through this really tough moment. And what I'm hearing from folks, as Black and Brown folks, that is that struggle's nothing new. This gives us another way to engage and to stand with our communities. Not to say that this kind of pandemic is the kind of thing we would wish for, we expected to get into, but it's almost as if we've been kind of prepared for these kinds of moments. To Carla's last point, it really doesn't matter whether we're on topic or not. Of course, my phone's ringing. My phone always rings when I'm on a Zoom call. It never fails. During class, doesn't matter. So we're Black and Brown folks. It doesn't matter if you're on topic or not. We're here to chop it up and share some wisdom. Next question for everybody, unless anyone has anything to add on that. We do get calls from the Colorado Republicans at times, which is really fascinating. Okay, next one we have is, as we see members of the population receive vaccines, I think we're up to 13% of the state of Colorado is now vaccinated. We're reinventing language on this panel as well. There's been talk of learning loss, particularly regarding our learners of color in Black and Brown communities. What's your reaction when you hear those words put together, learning loss?
I think the first word that just comes up first is vaccines. I think everyone's in this idea of trust versus fear right now. And then that's when we get to this idea of addressing learning loss, because I think we all see it. We all see it on every level, no matter if it's elementary, middle, high school, in the homes, talking with families, talking with parents. You know, it's that same level of frustration. So it's almost just kind of figuring out what plans we can put in order, and is that reality of recouping what has been lost actually possible? And back to Carla's point, which I think she brought up was very valid, is really listening to, you know, the youth, listening to the students, you know, because a lot of times they do have a lot of weight or gravity in what they're saying and what they're communicating. So I personally don't work as a teacher with, you know, having curriculum or anything, but I do run support groups with a lot of Native students. And what I find at the beginning was I was trying to give them a narrative to run with, you know, in our conversations. And then I took a step back, and back to Carla's point, what is it that you guys want to talk about? You know, what's surfacing through your mind? And it's all today's relevant things that they wanted to hop into. And again, they had very, very good topics. I mean, heavy or weighted ways of where they're speaking about it. So it's just, I don't know, you know, kind of just changing that perspective, because yeah, we all see it as learning loss. But again, there are those little opportunities where we can see that there's very huge enlightenment in these brains here.
So appreciate this point about student voice. We know that across the system, there's a lot of rhetoric around student voice and leadership. But what we hear from young people over and over again is that they are not receiving a forum to share their ideas and share their needs. So learning loss, any other folks who would like to comment on this chosen terminology?
So it made me think of something one of my students said, one of my 9th graders, when he said, you know, I'm tired of living through historic times. You know, it's like rapid fire, right? I mean,
yeah,
you know, and we keep, right. We keep saying like, you know, this is historic, you know, and then another historic event happens. You're like, wait, the Capitol's never been attacked before. Like,
well, I had the same thing happen in my history class. I don't want to be a part of history anymore.
Right? We just want to be quote unquote normal. And, you know, and that's been a theme in my class, you know, in my classes now for a while now. Like, do we really want to return back to normal? And the kids are like, wait, you know, and I'm like, exactly, right? You know, and so, but no, I totally felt what that kid was saying. It's just a 9th grader, man. And I was like, that's incredible, right? I mean, that, you know, I'm so tired of living through, I just want things to be boring again, you know? I was like, that's incredible, you know, that's incredible. What an insight. You know, I think a lot of times when we talk about learning loss, we also have to resist the temptation to like fall back into our sort of deficit assumptions. We're so embedded in deficit assumptions, even of our own people, man, right? We've had that embedded in us from day one, that, you know, learning loss is based on the assumption that, you know, we're losing out on whatever it is that I have to teach in my classroom. You know, I'm seeing kids now. I don't know if the rest of you are feeling this or seeing this, but I feel like I'm seeing kids mature in front of me, right? As they live through these times. I'm seeing kids like having to process a lot of stuff that they usually, now I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm not, you know, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, because right away we assume like, oh, maturity is good. Well, yeah, I want kids to be kids too. I have to remind kids that, like, guys, you know, hold on to your childhood as long as you can, man, because when it's gone, it's gone. You know, you're in such a rush to be an adult that, you know, it's okay to be a kid for as long as you can. And so, you know, yeah, I don't know. I mean, learning loss, okay. I mean, I get it. And I know that I'm arrogant as a social studies teacher, that, you know, like, I'm not as concerned about, you know, the math formulas that the kids don't know and stuff like that, you know. But I think on the other hand, kids are learning a lot of things that I don't think we could have taught in school. You know what I mean? At this point, they're having to think about, like, you know, again, like I said, I mean, this Trump presidency has been unbelievable. I'm just like stunned half the time. I'm like, you know, and then, you know, COVID and so on. So anyway, that's my initial thought.
I love that point. And, you know, one of the points I think would be important to come back to is, you know, to get into a more sort of a nuanced conversation around the concept of learning loss. We know that missing in-person school impacts different groups, different grade levels, different subjects differently. So so having that kind of hot take around students have categorically lost learning, I think ignores some of the holistic aspects of what it means to be a person, and also in some interpretations assumes a deficit mindset. So thank you, Andres, for that.
To build on the previous comments too, like, learning loss according to who? According to what? Standards that humans created, so we can uncreate them, number one. And number two, I think this is a great time for us to really rethink what is learning. I mean, we could be transforming systems right now. It's such a great opportunity to take advantage of. So I think that's maybe where the focus should go, versus this rush to freak out over learning loss, because in many ways, those standards for what kids are supposed to know is arbitrary. And so it's a great time to rethink that.
That was a big like aha moment in my graduate program, was realizing that standards-based instruction was just as arbitrary as anything else. It was just one approach to teaching. I was like, wait, what? There's other ways? Nila, you unmiked before I rudely interrupted you.
That's okay. I was just, I'm glad that I waited to talk because learning loss gets me hype. Like it's really like immediately I'm like, I want to get in someone's face. And I think a lot of that is like kids already had learning loss. I work at a high school and I can't tell you how many Black and brown kids come in my classroom, went to the same schools, went to Merrill, went to McCullough, wherever, the same schools that their white counterparts that are sitting right next to them went to. And they come in reading at a 3rd grade reading level. And I'm like, how do you get passed on? Where is the stop? And I'm a science teacher. I don't even teach reading. And finding the power in how do we make sure that our students aren't getting those gaps, and who taught you and who did this injustice? And why don't you know just the basic standards in the first place? And so I think learning loss was already a problem for our students in particular. And what's going to happen and what's already happening is they're starting to say things like summer school, after school tutoring. And that's not realistic. That just sounds like you're penalizing students for learning loss. You're saying, hey, you can't do normal things after school. You can't do sports. You can't do this, right? You need to be in the classroom because our teachers can't figure out how to differentiate and get you where you need to be. Instead of saying, hey, we're going to go make sure all of our teachers know how to differentiate because they should have already in the first place. And we're going to move students where they need to be. And like Carla said, like that radical education, and I know that we plan on talking about that later, is going to be super key in making sure that this idea exactly of whatever they mean by learning loss needs to be transformed and looked at in a very different way. But we need to acknowledge those injustices. We have kids in our system that we're going to fail if we don't fix it right now. Like they're actual students that aren't going to get what they need to be successful.
Nila, that's such a powerful point. That's so important. Could I ask a follow-up question to that? And this is something that I've thought about before. Our Black and brown students have categorically experienced learning loss throughout the life of this educational system. Nila, let me ask you, why do you think now we care about learning loss for BIPOC children as a system? Why is that now a part of the conversation where it wasn't a part of the conversation before? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm trying to decide if I'm going to answer this with my education hat or my radical revolutionary hat.
We can put up a poll real quick. What do we want? Which hat? Do you have actual hats? That would be dope if you could like.
Oh, they're invisible.
All right, got you.
The revolution hat, the revolution hat.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of vote revolution, but I understand that we're all trying to keep jobs and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Will you restate the question for me just again so I can gather my bearings?
Absolutely. So we have a comment from the chat, Revolution Hat. So the question is, knowing what we know, that learning loss has happened over a period of generations for Black and brown children, why is it that this is the North Star for education right now? And they're using BIPOC children to kind of say, hey, we need to really do better now because BIPOC children are falling behind. What would you guess in your own kind of profession?
It makes liberals feel good. And they've done this before. And that's what I was saying, like with the READ Act and this George Bush, No Child Left Behind. Oh, we're saving the children. Oh, we're giving them what they need. Like you can cry me a journey of white tears, a river. Like I don't have time to entertain it anymore. And I think that that is like, we had this huge protest over the summer. People are really starting to see, right? With social media, you see videos of people dying by police hands, right? These liberal and colonial systems, they're systems, right? The problem is colonialism. And people don't want to attack colonialism. That's not what they want to do. They want to create these false band-aids to situations that aren't going to do anything for anybody. And so what I think right now, they're saying, hey, this is our solution, this is our extension, this is our handout, so that they can continue to rob essential workers of a good living wage, right? So they can continue to get money off of people and get rich right now. the millionaires are getting rich, right? And so it's like, it's very systematic and it's stacked, right? And education is the box, right, where they try to push this propaganda. You all are right here, need to get all of this propaganda so that you can be good workers in this society. And so, you know, hey, address learning loss. We did what we could for you. And it's your fault that you're failing in this system, when really is this higher problem of like, we took over your land, we took over your people, we take over your education, instead of like listening to the people of color and giving the teachers of color the journey and the opportunity to give back that information that was stolen.
Thank you for that. I can almost hear the applause. If we were in person, it would be like there'd be a standing O. We wouldn't even be able to continue this panel. Shall I move on to the next question?
I'd say she bodied that one, so yeah.
All right, excellent. So yeah, definitely. So we'll move on to this next question. Of the numerous debates that have erupted around COVID-19 and education, so this could include testing, this could include, you know, I lost my place, reopening, vaccines, in-person activities, sports, which has been the most front and center in your context? So there's always different sites have different things that they're really debating about. In my particular context, it was whether hybrid teaching is really a good idea, right? So is there a specific debate that's happening in your community that's connected to this moment? And or is there anything else that's that's kind of outside of that? Also, if my questions are confusing, please let me know. My students half the time are like, Munoz, what? This is what I call the guess what's in my head game.
I'll hop in on that really quickly because it's just some of the things that I've been noticing with the groups that we've had. I would say in person has been a huge verbiage that's been continuously repeated in my community, in the balance versus, you know, virtual. So a great example is these drums behind me. I actually got to make this one. And it really has a lot of elements. I mean, Carla's point, Nila just hitting, you know, everything on the head. This was something that the students wanted to do. You know, we had an elder come through, and not only does this teach you about, you know, mathematics, you know, circumference, radius, we also take time to speak on culture. So, you know, there's cultural relevance behind a lot of it too. And then the third piece that we go into is there's directional. So, you know, we always talk about the East, you know, East, West, North and South. And, you know, it plays right along with this drum. So to summarize this whole experience, it all had to be done virtually. And if you close your eyes for a minute, or if you were to close your eyes for that moment and just imagine everything that I was explaining, we all think of that in person and how valuable that would be in person, how great that would be in person. So, of course, we couldn't do that. It was virtual. And in doing so, in reflection, what we noticed is there's just still some of those restrictions that were at play. So with Native heritage, there's always this idea of emotional health, physical health, spiritual and mental health. So, you know, there's that quality of 4 that comes into play. And it was almost like one of those elements was missing out of it that we couldn't quite grasp. And, you know, I heard you mention, you know, this hybrid idea of hybrid learning, and I wish someone in this whole globe had the exact answer for this so we all could move forward. But all I know is in the experience of some of these virtual things, there are elements that just cannot be met that in person will always meet time and time again. So I don't even know if that answered your question. So maybe you're playing like the whole question of, you know, what's in my head now, but
I don't even know what my question was. No, yeah, I think that really is something that is really being thought about. You know, I've been teaching this is my 22nd year teaching, and I feel like a new teacher again. I feel like I had all these ideas in my previous teacher life that just aren't the same now. Like I've just seen so much of my toolbox just vanish in this whole thing. And that's definitely a conversation. I was actually hoping everybody would close their eyes and go with you on that journey. All right, other thoughts on this? So what is it in your community that you're talking about regarding COVID? One other topic that comes up in my school is the attainment of credits and you know, grades and those kinds of things. Like how do we deal with that given the environment? So and if my question doesn't make sense, we can definitely move on. It would not be the first time this ever happened to me. Feel like that might be proper wait time. We can move on if that's okay with folks. So the next one I think speaks to a couple of comments that have come up most recently, Nila, when you were discussing you know, the roles of teachers of color and that kind of thing. So according to a recent report from Univision, Colorado schools could see an attrition rate of around 40% among teachers. In other words, that 40% of teachers could possibly leave the profession after this school year. We also know that the attrition rate for BIPOC educators each year is 60% higher than that of our white counterparts. So knowing this, how might schools choose to sustain and, dare I say, grow the population of BIPOC educators?
I'll say something about that. I think that, I mean, you know, I guess the first obvious one is yeah, support, right? I mean, you know, having things like this, having, you know, it can be, you know, isolating, right? I mean, you know, I can count the number of colleagues of color, you know, on one hand in my school, you know, to be able to relate to, right? And, you know, and then I've got other colleagues of color that, you know, really aren't you know, they're not culturally conscious. They're not, you know what I mean? And I think that matters, you know what I mean? So like, you know, you get the glazed over look when you like make some you know, comment or whatever, you know, and you're looking at somebody who looks like you and you're like, all right, that obviously ain't making sense. Yeah, we're talking different language here. So no, I think, you know, having others that, you know, relate to, you know, a lot of the issues that we, you know, that communities of color are going through, you know, and not just something that, you know, we read about, you know, or we study and, you know, we take a class on, you know, getting our licenses or whatever, but that, you know, and I think that's probably the most obvious one that I think of immediately. You know, I think that when we have allies that, you know, aren't people of color, I think that makes a big difference too. People who are willing to, just like we talked about, just like Carla, you know, said, we got to listen to our kids. You know, there's times when I'm like, I don't feel like I'm not being heard, man. I mean, I'm sitting at this table and I'm saying stuff and I don't think you know, a damn thing got heard. And you know what I mean? Because then they'll just move on with the agenda. Like they'll look at me like, okay, and then they just move on, you know, and just like, dude, you know, did I just say that in a different language, like, you know? And so, you know, we'll have these professional meetings and things, and like I said, and I'm talking about like meetings that are in person. I mean, this is pre-COVID, right? So you know, much less in this remote zone. I think I don't know, it's important to have people who can relate, that are willing to hear and to entertain new ways of understanding things that they might not be used to, you know, because I think, like I said, I don't know that we're going to reach a time when, you know, we can all like look forward to a time when, you know, we've got all, you know, teachers of color around us, right? anytime soon. We're going to need to be able to, like I say, be able to communicate with each other and have people that are willing to be open enough to really hear, you know, our perspectives, you know.
So what I'm sort of hearing is there's a choice to be made whether whether schools and buildings will actually learn to entertain different points of view when it comes to addressing challenges. What do others think?
I think, oh, Marcus, were you gonna go?
Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I think districts and schools need to take, and I would even include like the Department of Education, universities need to take a really hard look in the mirror at their cultures. And what kind of culture have we created here? And does it create a sense of belonging, or is it hostile? And I think that's first and foremost, because what did you say, 60% of the 40%?
So yeah, the math is weird. So 60% more likely to leave the profession than our white counterparts.
And you know what, honestly,
Don't ask me what that means.
I don't know what that means either, but I do know.
It means really way more likely.
You and I have been in this profession for 22 years. How much has that changed? I mean, it has gotten worse. We've had a teacher shortage for, you know, however long since the reform movement started, because the society has just been kind of hostile to teachers in general. But then I think districts and schools need to really look at their cultures. I think many work environments can be hostile towards teachers of color. And I've watched it. I've watched administrators of color be run out. I've watched, you know, when Denver went through their reforms, like all of the old school Black and brown teachers got run out. Like I've watched it all happen. And so, you know, we do workshops and we do these things that, like Nila said, oftentimes are Band-Aids, instead of looking at the culture and looking at the mirror of like, do we have a sense of belonging in this district, in this school, that in which we can retain our teachers of color?
Yeah, and I really appreciate what you said in terms of there's a cultural problem, there's a pipeline problem. It goes all the way to teacher prep programs that that have a lot of their own flaws when it comes to empowering candidates of color. Marcus, where I think you were next.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is everything I was building up in my head as far as, you know, this idea of changing policy, you know, that culture and policy really somehow have this way of being really close to each other at times. Well, you know, according to policy, that's not business like, you know, attire, so you can't wear that. And it's like, well, this is a part of my culture. So, you know, can we at least recognize that element of it? Or in my culture, this is something that would be considered, you know, royalty or a regalia of some sort. So there's that. But I mean, if you want to,
like white supremacist notions of professional,ism, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A great example is New Zealand Parliament happened when a Maori member wanted to come and speak, and they didn't want to let him speak because of his traditional tie that he wore. And you see he had his face, the traditional face marks that he had on too. But yeah, and here again, that was a great example that we got to see here in 2021, to where a whole nation, a whole parliament came back and changed their decision and said, okay, we want to acknowledge that what you're wearing is something that is business attire, and we do want to acknowledge your culture. So if someone are at that level, at that capacity, can do it there, absolutely there can be things that can be changed here on a cultural level. When it comes to policy, how deep rooted it really, really gets back to this, you know, just ruthlessness of it. My opinion goes back to boarding schools. A lot of those boarding schools were put in place not to lift anything. It was more to, I mean, again, a direct quote is going to be, kill the Indian, save the man. So right off rip, that doesn't sound very pleasant. You know, right off rip, the culture is already being set up to be something very, very vicious. So that to me is where I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head. Is, you know, we have to address culture. Again, my 2 cents in that is policy. You know, policy somehow seems to be what a lot of people hide behind when it's like, oh, well, according to policy, you know, or back to, I think someone said, well, I checked these boxes off the list. So boom, 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 done. On to the next department or on to the next person. So those are the things I feel like can help reach those, you know, collaborative efforts and, you know, actually show actions as far as being open-minded.
Thank you, Marcus. So true. Neil?
I was just gonna say, stop being racist. Like, someone had a question in the chat that was like, what can I do? Just like, stop being racist, like stop with the microaggressions, like walk into this work with us, like hold our hand. Everybody needs to be trained on anti-racism training. Everybody needs to just like really start to dig into it and like know that like our past is our past, we need to let it go. And listen and pay these experts that you already have in your districts. They're teachers that have been here for a really long time, that know what they're talking about, know what they're doing, have been doing this, right? Have data that supports why we need to be teaching in a radical way. And so leverage them and put money behind it, right? We put money behind things that we care about.
Invest, invest, invest. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this question from the group? So I want to come back to a couple of quick things, and thank you for those of you who are placing comments in the Q&A. Really, really helpful. And just want to invite the panel, if you want to grab one of those questions that relates to something we're discussing, absolutely feel free to do that. We will definitely carve out about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to intentionally address those questions. We can talk about them at any point. So one of the questions, or one of the topics that you all have sort of discussed at one point or another, is the possibility of radical rethinking and transformation of our schools. The pandemic hasn't been good, but it has forced us to confront some realities that were laid bare for us. Those of us in the classroom have had to make pivots and educate ourselves very quickly about what this type of environment means for our students. So what are some possibilities, first of all, that you see for taking this moment to radically transform what we do in school with young people? And the second part of this is, what are some ways that you yourself have radicalized your teaching and learning space in response to these conditions? And maybe you are already doing some of this stuff, and feel free to share that as well.
I'll go ahead and take that. I don't know that I've necessarily, to be honest, I feel like, like you said, Gerardo, that I feel like a new teacher again. I'm an old teacher. I've been doing this a while, right? And so I don't feel like I've been able to radicalize or realize anything, right now, right? But I can very clearly see how possibilities have been opened up, right? And not just related to COVID, I can't say enough, right? How much BLM made a difference in pushing, and even if it is, right, was it Carla that said, making liberals feel good or whatever, hey, whatever, man, whatever it takes, right? But because I like all of a sudden, like Adams 12, where I teach, right, they're all of a sudden like, oh, we've got to deal with racial justice. And I'm like, what? Really? Okay, let's do this. Like, all right. So no, but that's just on a like larger, sort of administrative level. I think that, there really are opportunities for us to really seriously like get colleagues to rethink, on a bigger scale, right? Like, okay, we've got to rethink our scope and sequence, not just of our content, but also thinking about how do we even assess students, right? And considering some alternative assessment. I mean, I've got administrators in my building that are giving some serious thought to that, you know, and I'm like, again, it's one of those things where I've been like a broken record on this for years. We've got to take a look at how we assess kids in a more culturally responsive way, for example, right? You know, so I mean, the possibilities are endless, right? I think kids are going to come back with a lot of energy, and that's a good thing. They're going to come back with a lot of energy, ready to mix it up. And I think we need to be prepared to capitalize on that as much as possible. You know what I mean? I said that back when Trump was elected. You know, I was like, dude, this dude, unbelievable, right? But I told colleagues, you know, and again, I got a lot of liberal colleagues, you know, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe. And I'm like, let's capitalize on this, man. This guy is on. Are you hearing what this guy is saying? This is firing kids up. This is firing people up. We need to use that to our advantage. You know what I mean? Instead of sitting around, moping around, you know. And I think that's a moment we're in now, right? That we can see some systemic change possibilities. I don't know. We know that systems and institutions are pretty resilient things. So we'll see.
Resilient. They have grit, don't they?
Don't they?
They have grit. You know, I think that's a really interesting point. Something that occurs to me as I reflect on your answer, Andres, is that things that others may view as radical don't sound that radical to us, because we've kind of entered this space of radical. So you may say, you know, we really need to rethink the way we assess BIPOC children. It may be that the assessments are racially rigged and don't show their true talents. For us, that's like, well, yeah, of course. But
well, yeah, let me dig up the article from 1997 that found that research that supported that. You know what I mean? Like, you know, here we go. Yeah, here it is. Let me blow the dust off of it.
Yeah, and to your point, the system itself is kind of like, whoa. So maybe that's another way to think about this. What so-called radical idea is starting to gain traction? Do you think there is a real opportunity to take advantage of? So Andres, thank you for just helping to reconceptualize that question. When you're radical, nothing seems radical.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think that that's one of the biggest challenges, at least that I've seen from, you know, my context is just, you know, and I know, you know, of course, I mean, I've known you for, you know, I don't know how long, Carla. I've known, you know, my brother-in-law, Jaime, teaches over at West. I mean, you know, we've been together. You know, DPS is in my blood. My mom and dad dropped out of North. My aunts and uncles all went to North, you know, and you know, so my daughter did gymnastics.
Because Carla hadn't gotten there yet.
Right, exactly.
It would have been really different if Carla had.
Right, yeah. You know, and so it's interesting to always see like how things compare, right? When we look at, you know, because you know, I'm in what I call the new North Side, right? You know, the North Side's been so gentrified that, you know, I got all the brown kids up in Thornton now, and you know, Thornton as they call it, right? And so no, you're right. I mean, these are things. A lot of these ideas aren't new, and they really shouldn't be radical at all, right? Like I said, something as simple as like, you know, alternative assessment. You know, taking into account different ways of understanding things like history, right? Like, do we really have to always learn history in a linear, like, you know, old Eurocentric way? Or can we look at it in a more holistic way? Do we really have to compartmentalize curriculum in the way that we used to, you know what I mean? So that it lends, you know, so that it's no longer lending itself to this old, worn out, tired ass, you know, Eurocentric, you know, way of understanding everything. You know, it opens up possibilities. And I think that's what we really need to be focused on. We get so caught up in the weeds of dealing with the logistics of things. I think that's what administrators get caught up in. They go in with these great grand ideas, and then they get in the weeds, like they're having to put out fires, and then pretty soon they're just like, oh man, I'm tired, right? I'm just dealing with, like I said, logistics. And we can't allow ourselves to like get caught up in that. Before you know it, you're sitting at a meeting and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe we sat here for 2 hours talking about, I don't know, how to administer the bubble sheet or whatever. Like what, So I think we've got to be willing and have we've got to have the strength and the sort of wherewithal to derail agendas at times at meetings, like, raise your hand, be like, wait, excuse me, can we, change the script for a minute and talk about some new ways of approaching this instead of, rearranging the furniture on the Titanic or whatever,
Absolutely. That's such a great point. One of the things that I have a 16-year-old today, actually, just turned 16 today, who has been learning 10 feet away from me for most of the school year. And what they've said to me is like, I kind of wish I could take classes from these teachers I know of at these other schools, as opposed to some of the teachers that I currently have. And so when you start thinking about these are things that young people are kind of thinking about. It's weird. It's so weird to think about, but kind of an interesting thing. What are some other things that you all think present possibility for us as we move through this pandemic, hopefully with a vaccine for everyone, hopefully to more in-person opportunities for our kids?
Two answers to that is telling them the truth, telling them what, everything really is. And when I say that, I mean that in the sense of, right when I brought up boarding schools, there are some head nods, because it's like, okay, there is some actual truth in there that isn't really discussed when it comes to, education or just education relationships in Native Americans. So bringing that to light, or just bringing representation to light. I do a lot of time just on my own finding different people that, did study mathematics or did have a chemistry background. There's different nations right here that have been here, again, First Nations that have been here that understood chemistry very, very well, that understood mathematics very well, that studied astrology for thousands and thousands of years. And those are the sources that I try to go and find. And in those moments, to me, I think back to your point as far as saying, when you live in this way, you don't see it as a radical way. This is just who you are. You're just moving like this all the time. So, I always tell the students, when people ask, what is your radical movement, or, what are you doing to do that? I say, well, one, I'm breathing, I'm breathing right now. Look at where
Your
I'm at.
existence is resistant.
Yeah, absolutely. So that element is a huge piece. And the fact that I can still speak, bits of my language, that a language that was something that was trying to be stripped away from my people from so long ago, is a second element behind it. And again, that third piece is representation. Where can I find something that represents the Native students? And also what I'm finding out in all of this is so beautiful is I have Native students that are Chickasaw, Choctaw, and they look white. They got sandy blonde hair, hazel blue eyes, and their first thing is, well, I've never faced racism before. And it's like, well, let's break that down a little bit. Well, people have made some, comments about Native Americans before, but they didn't know I was Native American. So I didn't think it was directed at me. I'm like, but did you feel some type of way about it? Yeah. Okay, so then that is your experience of racism. Just because you don't look a certain way doesn't mean that you're not experiencing it. And again, you're seeing the diversity of all these different examples of mathematicians, of athletes, of scientists. I was just talking to a doctor the other day. He actually retired from ILIF, School of Theology, and he gave an awesome statistic that said when he was in school back in the 90s to get his doctorates, you know, maybe 4 or 5 Native Americans that had doctor within their name. He said here in 2021, we got over 300 throughout the nation. So it's up to me to try to find those 300 different types of people. Again, experts in any field, come here so then students that look like you or think like you, because again, it's not always this physical element, that think like you can also be like, okay, well, that person got there. Now, how can I get there too? So.
I love that perspective. That's such a powerful perspective, Marcus. Thank you for sharing that. And it is interesting because it is this kind of return to our place of origin. What is it that we needed to begin with? And that was a sense of self and identity and placement in this world. And I've got some things to say definitely about like these innovative approaches that come from our traditions as BIPOC folks. Nila.
Yeah, I was just going to say some things that have been starting to have conversations with since March, but haven't got much ground is like GPA. Like, when are we going to talk about GPA and the problems that it creates and the stress that puts on our students? Our students right now have the highest suicide rates of any teenagers ever documented. And so there's a lot of pressure on them. And so how do we, one, relieve this pressure, but also exactly step into this transformative space that school doesn't have to look colonial anymore. In DPS right now, we're working on getting out the SROs, right? Our security resource officers. I mean, I've been in groups with that. And what it really seems like is they're just going to replace them with these roles of people, right, that are doing exact same things that police officers do. That's not it, right? We need to actually be trained in restorative justice. We need to actually have the power and the money that comes with the mental health resources. I also think that we have to address testing. Testing shouldn't determine funding for a school, right? Schools shouldn't be this, maybe you get it, maybe you don't, if your test scores say you can. It should be like all schools get money. And I think that we're seeing that across the nation, that is causing a problem, right? On track to graduate. And this learning loss is a real thing all over the nation. Schools have been scrambling to figure out how they're going to basically just pass kids and find a way to fill in those gaps. And so I think that, like I said, it has to be radical, and some radical things like it sounds like we're doing is to bring culture into the classroom. It has to completely flip. And teachers can't be the masters of the classroom anymore. You can't be up there. You can't be the dictator. Students know what they want to learn. They're smart too. And I think someone had said earlier, right? Teenagers feel more than adults. We're set in our ways. Teenagers understand things at a very complex level, and so do little kids. If you teach preschool or elementary school, and so if you think a kid's not ready to talk about racism, I bet you they are, because the minute they go to school, that's when the first time that they see it. And so they need to process it. They need to talk about things that matter. And we need to teach them things that matter. There's so many things that they learn in school that they will never use again. And why do we continue to teach it year after year?
This incredibly powerful point, a series of points. These are pieces that have disproportionately harmed BIPOC children from grade point average, which is still the single most important determining factor in college admission, suicide rates, mental health. I really love, Nila, how you address this question as to what is happening from what is happening to what we have an opportunity to address. Like, this is an abolitionist mindset that this is hard. We have a chance though right now. And, you know, I think based on what both Nila and Marcus said, I think this idea of how do we now approach our students in a more authentic way. They know what's happened, and they know they can't take our half truths anymore. They know when we're perpetrating and fronting, so to speak. They know, and so how do we do that? And the other thing that I think is so powerful in what you just said, it sounds like, and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, it sounds like what is really needed at the classroom level is for us to approach the learning process as a community and not an every person for themselves endeavor where some sink and some swim.
I was going to add that radical transformation was always the answer. That's always been the answer my entire time of teaching. And, you know, shout out to CU's Ethnic Studies Department. Woo woo. You know, when I went into teaching, that was my goal, that I wanted to see radical transformation of the public school system. And I am more sure now than ever that that is the answer. What this time has taught me is that that was the right answer all along. So when all the high stakes standardized testing came along and all the Bill Gates money came along, I was very opposed to all of that. And then there was a side of me, I promised myself when I became a new teacher that I would not become an old curmudgeon-y teacher that was not open to new ideas. I promised myself that as a new teacher. It kind of happened anyway. I definitely am an old curmudgeon-y teacher, but I have really forced myself to stay open-minded about different possibilities. Like, and I remember when that was happening, I thought it was like the devil reincarnated, and thinking like, oh, well, Carla, maybe you're biased. Maybe you're not seeing it totally the right way. Maybe there is some value in this way. And so I would stay open-minded and I would try different things. And it's not the answer. None of the things we have done, and the system was broken when I entered the profession, and it became more broken in the last year and a half. And so things like Nila was saying, GPA, time to evaluate, you know, attendance policies. Like, we have students who are missing school because they have to translate for parents. They have to work. Why are we punishing them for that? Re-looking at, like you said, this individualistic culture of schools where it's all about you. It's not about the community. It's not about you being part of a community. Maybe more flexible scheduling. So for our kids that do have to work, they don't get punished for it. You know, learning happens beyond the school walls. So more blending of school and the community as this more fluid place. I mean, there's so much opportunity here, and it needed to happen yesterday. And so that radical transformation, like, it has to happen. And it has always been our answer, really. You know, Marcus talked about boarding schools. There's this political cartoon that encapsulates education perfectly for me. And it's an imperialism cartoon where it's Uncle Sam at the chalkboard. Have any of you seen that? And he has already colonized those that were from Mexico and then became Americans in the Mexican-American War. So they're sitting in the corner, like, dressed in nice, you know, white clothing, military clothing. And now Uncle Sam has the burden of having to turn, like, all the Pacific Islanders and Puerto Ricos. And then there's like a Black guy in the corner of the classroom as well, that he has to be turned around. And so how far are we from that? We're not. And so let's go already. So we have this opportunity to it's been the answer all along. I don't know why we are looking elsewhere. We have the answers.
I have to take off my blazer. This whole conversation is so fire that I'm starting to overheat over here. So amazing insights from you all. You know, what you say, Carla, reminds me of a couple of things. You know, I think of my own curmudgeonliness as a veteran teacher. And I realized that I've gotten kind of stuck in my ways, but it's because my ways still haven't been embraced, right? Centering Black and brown children still hasn't been embraced. Yeah, I'm stuck in my ways. You ain't done it yet. And so that's the first part. And then the second thing I think of, I was talking to a friend of mine who used to run the Escuela Verde in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And what she said was that the highest aspiration for the students in her school wasn't independence, but interdependence. That being able to do things independently is important. You need to have initiative and you need to be able to see needs and meet them. But the ways in which you work in community, that's actually the highest level of human behavior. And I thought that was a beautiful thought that you kind of alluded to. So we got a question about white supremacy. I imagine that we have some thoughts on this. And then we're going to open it up. We have 14 questions in the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. And there are some that our panelists, you are free to respond to questions, as Marcus has, in that kind of thing, if you see something that really resonates with you. So as of January 20th, the Oval Office is no longer the primary platform for white supremacist culture and politics. Notice I said the primary platform. All right. However, we know that white supremacy persists, particularly in our state. Colorado has a pretty high proportion of white supremacist and hate groups that are in different parts of the state. In your context, what's the urgency of teaching anti-racism and addressing white supremacy? And do you feel positioned to fight these fights where you are?
I'll jump in. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is that, again, I think it resonated with me, right? Like this notion of like, okay, that if we don't confront, first of all, we need to move beyond the notion of, oppression, all the different types of oppression, right? Including racism, as being individual. Again, we think of it in this sort of individualistic way, right? That it's not, so that's why I'm saying like BLM, I kind of opened, and it's been around for a while. It's nothing new, but, this notion that this is really starting to understand the systemic nature of racism, right? That when we look at racism as, when we use the old term of what institutionalized racism or systematic racism or whatever. And I'm like, that's kind of redundant. Like, that's what it is. You know what I mean? Like, don't use it like that, because you give people the impression that it's a matter of just changing individual people's attitudes, and we have systems to change here, man. I mean, there's work to be done. And so Carla is absolutely right. The curmudgeon comes out in me all the time, right? Or I'm like, yeah, we're trying to, we have systems to change here, right? And I think that's, because I was looking at some of the questions posted, and I just want to make sure that we remember that, yes, when we are confronted with individual acts of meanness, right, or whatever, right, or when we see like microaggressions being carried out, by colleagues, or whatever, to me, those are relatively easy things to, for the most part, easy to fix. It's the systemic things that aren't, right? It's recognizing when the system is acting, as an oppressive, system. That's the part, that's where we got to put our heads together. And again, that's beautiful what you said, Gerardo, that this notion of like, independence is not the be all end all, right? That when we come together and we're working together, because we come from collectivist cultures, right? And that's a hard concept to get, people to understand. You see my daughter back here taking care of her guinea pig, so. But no, it's, I mean, so, I don't want to wander too far away from the question, but it was definitely worth commenting on.
I think the teachers that have the energy to fight, there are some teachers that are at this point, right, that they are so burnt down, right, especially teachers of color, by white supremacy. And you might not be a white supremacist, but you might have white supremacist indicators, right? Or things that you do that are triggers. And so teachers that do have the capacity, right? They only have so much capacity. And I also think like, this is where I always plug this, like there is a place for allies and there's a place, but you have to be ready to walk into that radical thinking. And absolutely, I do this every day. Like you are not gonna be in my science class and leave without having a lot of tools to be anti-racist as a student. And I think any kid that I come through, I still work other jobs outside of teaching, but that's a whole nother discussion. But I nanny kids that are younger. And like I said, they're ready for those conversations. And so there needs to be a curriculum and it needs to happen faster than late or sooner. I'm losing my track of my words, but it needs to happen fast. And like Carla said, the resources are out there already. We already have the tools. We already have the curriculum. Just let us do it and stop saying that like, we're going to focus on learning loss, we're going to focus on state testing, we're going to focus on this or that, but really focus on the social emotional well-being of students and like really doing this anti-racism work. And I think all of us here do that. And that's why we're here, right? Everyone that's attending this, we all are doing that work. There's a lot of us out there, and we need to start working in tandem and giving the mic to the people of color, because we've seen what happens when the white liberals lead it for us. Nothing happens. It has to be us for us. We have the answers. Let us do it and just help us out.
So yeah, I mean, to feed off that point, I actually wanted to add some links in the chat, and I think I'm doing this correctly where everyone sees it, even the attendees. We do have a lot of things already in place in order for us to just help out our community, help our students out. You know, looking at, you know, this one where it's, you know, I just want to make sure I don't mess up the reclaiming the native truth. You know, that really goes into in depth, you know, a lot of the little pieces that I was kind of dropping here and there about, you know, boarding schools, or, you know, the whole idea of, you know, kill the Indian but save the man, you know, that mentality, how it hasn't quite left the systems at place here. And, you know, everyone in this panel has really done a good job of really just tying it back to, yes, we're hearing these questions of what is it that we can do, but again, it's directing it back to the systems at hand that have been in place for hundreds of years at this point. And just, I think Nila said it again, you know, just really quit distracting yourself with all these other things that we need to focus on as far as these, I don't know, false fires, if you want to call it, and really focus on the source, because the source right now that I'm seeing is that social and emotional support. And a lot of that is something that is tied within our culture and through our education system. So as far as my position, again, it's something I've answered before. It's me breathing here today. It's me being able to say shodaje, balajya, you know, and speak in my language, and, you know, encourage the next Native students that come from, you know, the Potawatomi Nation, or, you know, those that come from descendancy of the Taino or Choctaw or Chickasaw, you know, Kumeyaay. I mean, again, I can go on, Inuit, we can go into, you know, into Canada. Any of those that I run into, I always encourage you, you know, learn your language, learn something more that's tied to your culture, because then that's that source of feeding into your social element and that emotional piece. And you can dig more in finding more of that truth. So then, again, those very links I showed you, that second one, America loves celebrating Independence Day, 4th of July. We all love the Declaration of Independence. Little do we know that the Declaration of Independence talks about merciless savage Indians, killing them. So again, the rhetoric is within the systems at play. It's not just education. It's not just, you know, in different layers. It's in multiple layers at this point. So again, to, you know, bring me back to this point is just being able to share truth. Because if you look at some of those links, those are going to share with you that Benjamin Franklin himself saw the Iroquois nation, you know, a confederacy of 6 different tribes coming together and have been together for centuries. And they said, why can't our colonies do that very same thing? And this was 600 years before that, before 1776. So when I shared that one small fact to a bunch of Native students, their eyes light up. They're like, oh, really? Like they have a little bit more proud, you know, patriotic feeling about their nation. Because again, you know, us being Natives doesn't mean we can't be patriotic. So then, you know, a little kid, he was like, so mister, what you're telling me is that the Declaration of Independence was written off of Native American language, off of, you know, my people? And I say, yeah, you know, there's a heavy influence into that. And that's the very first thing he took to his grandma, to go tell his grandma, this is what I learned about my people today. And it wasn't in any specific core class or anything, but that was the key indicator for him that said, oh, wow. And because everyone knows Benjamin Franklin, George Washington. I mean, we got all the high schools, TJ. I can pick all of those apart. TJ himself, he said, if you cannot constrain yourself from lifting up an axe, then that means that we're not doing what we need to continue to move all the natives across the Mississippi. In other words, by any means necessary, get them away. We're trying to take this land here. And they're Native American students that have to go through that very high school. They're like, this is the context I want to make sure others that are non-Native, non-Black, non-BIPOC have to understand when some of these students walk through some of these thresholds, it's a different experience for them. I had one student, as soon as she walked into a common area, the first thing she saw was Pocahontas. Most people are like, oh, Pocahontas, I love that movie, the love story, the romance. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. And that's exactly what she did. She said, you know what that tells me? That tells me that they support rape, that they support murder, that there's missing murdered Indigenous women right here in 2021. You know, Selena Not Afraid, one of the people from my reservations, from so many different reservations. That's the first thing that went through her head as she went through Thomas Jefferson High School. Again, Thomas Jefferson, known for saying, if you can't even pick up the axe to continue doing what needs to be done, then we will never succeed in getting this land that we want to take. Again, I can go through every one of these high schools here, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, they all have that duality of, yeah, there's this white savior in it, but let's look at the truth behind it all. Let's really dig into what's really going on here, and we'll really start to learn that, yeah, good old Abraham Lincoln, the honorable guy that told the truth all the time, also led the largest execution of this nation, killing over 48 Dakotas. So those are the things that, again, Nilu brings back to it, as far as the youth are ready to have these types of conversations. They've been ready. The world has been prepared them, if not before COVID, especially now, because they all got their little, you know, phones and gadgets and tablets to where they can get into who knows whatever rabbit hole. I know I'm guilty of digging into rabbit holes at the age of 29. So who's to say that they're not doing the exact same thing in their age groups? So if the world's, it's one thing that my grandma always told me, and I'll leave it at this. Either I can show you and I can teach you, or the world's going to show you and teach you. You choose. You know, us as people have to choose what we're going to do in that matter.
Marcus, thank you for completely affirming all the complaining I do in front of my kid on that. All right, we are about 5 minutes away from being done. Panel, would you like to continue with this question, or would you like to take one question from the Q&A session? And this is a sorry, not sorry moment for the audience. We're very sorry we aren't able to get to all of your questions, but I really hope that hearing everybody's perspectives and insights and stories and passion and fire has made it worth it. So what do y'all think, panel? Want to pick a question? All right. Do you want to pick it? Do you want me to pick it? I feel like I'm running my class now. Me? Okay. You're both pointing at Marcus, which is really funny, but okay. Maybe you mean Marcus. So I want to, there's two questions that I think speak to a lot of what you all have said and that really resonate for me. So I'm going to combine the questions from Jasmine Gandaria and Ann Corrigan. These have to do with communities and how we engage. So Jasmine says, there seems to be a lost bridge between schools and communities, which again isn't new, but seems needed more now than ever. How can we as classroom teachers encourage the schools to open up to the community? And then Anne adds, in terms of student voice, what strategies have we found to effectively give families voice, and keeping in mind that Anne works with infants, toddlers to preschoolers, so policy input is a little harder to get from them. So I think an overarching kind of question is, what can we do as classroom teachers to engage and involve our families and communities in what's happening in our schools? And we have like 3 minutes now.
I don't think it's just on the teachers, like it needs to be on the whole building and the admin, because like when you said teacher, I was like, oh, hold up, they can't do all that. But phone banking, you need to be calling out to the community. Hey, do you know what's going on in the school? Do you have any questions? Like what feedback do you have? Just being very candid, let them lead the conversation, asking what they need and then providing it. And if you can't provide it, give them a very good answer as to why you cannot. So that way they know that you are in tandem and that you are working together.
I think schools need to figure out, and districts as well, different ways to reach out to parents, unless they're offering food and a party. I think if there's food and a DJ, you will get parents there. You know, I'm a parent myself. I will show up to school if that is happening. However, when you have like 6 o'clock, 7 p.m. meetings, it's always, you got to go to the school. You do it on the school's terms. I think schools need to be communicating with families and parents on their terms and figuring out what that looks like.
Yeah, I feel like if you're not using a messaging app, you're not talking to your Mexicano families. Other thoughts? Seriously, it's really why I have WhatsApp.
That's real. That's real. That's real.
Yeah, I think you know, being able to, you know, to go outside and allow for the venue not to have to be on our terms, right, in the school's terms, you know, and whatever that looks like. I know that's going to look different for each community, each neighborhood, and so on. But you know, I think a lot of times, like for example, I know there's a lot of families and parents and kids even that, you know, that are sometimes surprised to hear, like, yeah, we can work with church groups. Like they're like, wait, that's a lot. Like we could do that, you know. And it's like, yes, they're part of the community, you know, and you know, or whatever other, you know, or the you know, Mi Pueblo across the street from Thornton High School, you know, it's, I mean, let's partner with them, you know, and you know, or whatever it takes, you know, to be able to have people feel more comfortable, because I know my mom and dad did not feel comfortable going to school. They didn't feel comfortable in there. So
well, folks, this has been such an incredibly energizing conversation for me, like, and I hope it has been for the 100+ participants who are here to hear the wisdom and insights and just wonderful things that that you have to offer. I want to invite everybody really briefly to maybe, if it's possible, turn on your mic and applaud for our amazing panelists. Like, let them hear it. Let's hear some applause.
Yeah, woo!
Right. And I'm going to hand it off to Wajma for some closing remarks. Thank you, Andres. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Nila. And then, of course, thank you to Sarah, Becky, Kathy, and Wajma for facilitating and making this thing happen.
And thank you to Gerardo. And of course, thank you to Krishna, who is our fearless TOCA leader. I just want to thank everyone once again for joining us. Please come back on Thursday. There's going to be spaces for people to talk to each other about the things they want to talk to about. And so that affinity groups are really, really powerful. We hope to see you Thursday. And before you sign off tonight, you'll see a really quick pop-up with a short survey. If you could it won't take you more than a few minutes. Please fill it out to give us feedback. We really use feedback every year to try to make TOCA better year after year. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you to the panelists, and go Nuggets in a few hours.